What I want to talk about is the second Beatitude, although
Yes.
this is the third time I think I've shared on it, the
Yes.
second Beatitude, and found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4.
Yes.
You have that scripture? And it said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted."
Comforted.
Blessed are those who mourn. So remember, the very word blessed, okay, refers to a spiritual condition, okay, of divine joy that's already present. So when we use the word blessed, it doesn't mean something I will acquire,
Yes.
but meaning something I already have. So when it says, "Blessed are those who mourn," it's already saying those who mourn already have a divine gift of joy. It's already present.
Yes.
So it's not something that they are hoping to acquire or receive, but something they already have. Now, just as we read that text of scripture, blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted, we understand that this second beatitude is a clear case of what we call divine passive, a godly passive. In other words, God will meet the blessed who mourn.
Yes. Yes.
God will comfort those who already know the joy and peace of God who mourn. Not in mourning I'll get it, but God will bless those who are already in that state of blessed will be comforted who mourn. Now, in the Good News Bible, and you know what I think of the Good News, not much, okay? It's paraphrase. It's
Yes,
not
yes.
original, it's paraphrase.
Yes.
It's, I understand its purpose.
Yes.
It says to help encourage people.
Yes.
I prefer people to read the Good News than not read anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also prefer them to read the New American as
New
well.
American,
But
yeah.
anyhow, but the Good News Bible turns a passive into an active.
Yes.
And so instead of it saying, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted," the Good News says, "Happy are those who mourn, God will comfort them."
Interesting.
It's interesting, but the problem is that it doesn't bring about the actual meaning. Okay? So the first question we ask is, what exactly should we mourn?
Yes.
What are we mourning? Why are those who mourn called or considered blessed? Okay? So Christians are never urged to seek suffering.
Yes.
There are some, particularly in Catholicism, who would teach in some extreme groups self-harm
Oh.
by beating
my
yourself,
goodness.
hitting yourself, everything else, self-harm. Okay? Sort of like Christ on the cross. Like even in Rome, they supposedly have the 90-something stairs or whatever it was that was supposed to be to Golgotha, but it's not literally, but they say that. And people got to walk up there on their knees.
Oh my goodness.
And so it's got this idea from the Beatitude that if you inflict some pain, that somehow you're going to find blessing. But the blessing it's talking about is not something that you're going to get, it's something you already have.
Yes. Yes.
So it's talking about those who are in mourning who are already in that place of blessedness. So we have to understand that as Christians, we're never urged to seek suffering. But we are encouraged to recognize that suffering can be an extraordinary teacher. You know, we always say that good soil is not on the top of the mountain, but it's in the valleys.
Valley.
And the valley is in our suffering and our situations. And these circumstances that we face will either make us or they'll break us. Now, we know little about the great depths of the human spirit until we endured suffering.
Yes.
Even like special forces teams in armed forces around the world, they will go under certain experiences of suffering, okay, to see how they endure, if they'll give up easily or if they've got a fighting spirit. But this one thing I know is this, is that pain rearranges our priorities.
Yes.
That's a good line, isn't it?
Yes.
It's almost good enough to have on screen, okay? But pain rearranges our priority. So when you're in pain, what's your priority? So some people experience pain in their marriage. So they can rearrange their priorities. So instead of priority being, I'm here with you through sickness and health, to death to us part, they're like, I'm out of here. Too much pain. Pain rearranges our priorities, perhaps in friendship. Perhaps a friendship gets strained. There's a bit of pain.
Yes.
Some will say, I'm sticking by it because our friendship's worth it.
Yes.
Others say, forget about it. But it could also be in the area of church. So there are those who are once strong in their faith in God. Today they're not.
Yes.
And that's because they experience pain.
Pain, yeah.
It could be from the church itself, or it could be because of they feel unanswered prayer. You find I was listening to a particular illustration given by a pastor about this particular couple in America.
Yes.
I think it was in Arizona. And they were saying, and they're ministering, but they're both the people who are divorced and remarried, but they're ministering. And they said that they had a 9-year-old child who died.
Oh, wow.
And with that child dying, it created such pain that it rearranged the priorities, and the priority of staying together, husband and wife, didn't hold in. So pain will rearrange our priorities. It can be positive or it can be negative. Then I was thinking, Ed, about refugees.
Yes.
I'm not talking about people who pay money to get out, but I'm talking about genuine refugees.
Yes. War refugees.
And I've met many people who have been refugees, and when they tell me this story of what they went through,
yes.
and normally sometimes the worst pain they experienced wasn't the country they fled from, but would be the refugee camp they're in.
Yes,
And then in the case where the women said they were raped, and all sorts of things happened. And, to become a refugee, a true refugee, has got to be horrible.
Yeah.
And the forces that drive people from their homes, have got to be opposed and stopped. You think about the refugees from the Ukraine war.
Yes.
The Russians did. And yet there are people in Western countries, in particular United Kingdom, where there are men who are trying to take advantage of these women who are refugees, wanting sexual favors and other stuff. And there's some terrible stories. And I think we're going to hear more stories as time goes on. It's bad enough they had to flee their country, let alone have people in other countries trying to take advantage of the situation. Yet anyone who is obliged to flee their home quickly learns what really matters. What really matters is life.
Yes.
And their possessions at the end of the day are worthless.
Yes.
Right? Because they've just had a rocket go through their apartment block.
Yeah.
Or they got people being shot in the street. And all of a sudden to do it. It's a reminder of the World War II with the refuge. One was from the Germans, and two is when the Soviet Union came in and people were fleeing.
Yeah.
See, you got to understand this. Mourners, those who mourn, endure suffering. And the blessed ones who walk in the blessing, who among them experience the comfort of God. So if you understand what it is, see, you can be a Christian and not have God's presence. And I've seen that. I've seen people come into church who are Christians and they're falling apart.
Yes.
Because they're coming to church to get that blessedness, meaning to get God's presence. But there are people who are suffering, and I've seen that with Colin Margaret Lobb with the cancer treatment going through. And everything he's going through, he has this state of blessed.
Yes.
And I say, blessed are those who mourn.
Yes.
And I see them just in faith. There's still tears.
Yeah.
Still grief, but they have faith. Yet I see others with, it's like a hangnail compared to what they have, and they're falling apart.
Yes.
So mourners endure suffering. Anyone who mourns endures suffering. But the blessed ones, they experience comfort from God. And that's why the Bible said, blessed are those who mourn, meaning you're already in that blessed state, for they shall receive comfort from God. I think of the natural disasters we hear.
Yes.
Now, the difference between a cyclone and a hurricane, you know the difference between a cyclone and a hurricane?
Oh, it's where it is on the equator?
No. So a hurricane, which is in the northern hemisphere, turns clockwise.
Ah, yes.
And a cyclone, southern hemisphere, turns anti-clockwise.
Yes.
The magnetic force, right?
Yep.
So that's how it goes.
Same with the toilet flush.
That's right. When water goes down the sink. That's actually gospel truth.
Yeah.
It's because of the magnetic force, North Pole versus South Pole. And you think you're smart, don't you? Okay. Erica, you can't say much because we can't see you.
I know. It's fine. I'll withhold.
Okay. Thanks, God. It must have been good. Okay. But I think of the natural disasters like cyclones or tsunamis.
Yes.
They strike our world, all right? And when there is a warning, you're always going to get a few brave souls, usually, or fools, who choose to remain in their homes.
Yes.
Right? But the vast majority of the inhabitants flee from the coming devastation. But after the storm abates, those who are able to do so return home.
Yes.
And at times there is a pattern that emerges between the lines of the news reports that are written for the world to read. And the pattern is this. Often there's a striking contrast between those who stay and those who leave. And I think for us here, it had to really do with the bushfires.
Yeah.
So the big disaster for us, we had the floods.
Yes.
Was the bushfires.
Yeah.
I think see, the floods is gradual. You know what I mean? And you can momentarily be in the water, get away, but in the bushfire, you're consumed.
Consumed, yeah.
And there are pictures of those who stayed and those who left.
Yes.
Now, normally the hearts of those who stayed and survived is often a heart full of gratitude.
Yes.
And the gratitude is not about what was saved or what was lost, but rather they're still alive. Whereas those who returned, they don't have the gratitude they're alive, but rather they see the devastation and anguish of what they lost.
Yes.
Because they didn't go through the suffering. They went through the suffering of losing things, but not the threat of losing their life.
Yes.
And when you experience personal anguish or personal devastation, then it can be different. So the one who might have lost the home but stayed there at the fire, are just saying, I'm just grateful I'm alive.
Yeah, yeah.
But the one who got away and came back, they're just going, I'm falling apart because of what I've lost. And, you know, the one who is lashed by the storm is often the one who is most grateful.
Yeah, yeah.
The one who is lashed by the storm is often the one who is most grateful. And that's what happens. It's the storms in our lives that make us or break us. It's the storms in our life that develop us and bring us. And I can look back to certain storms in my life, and I'm sure as you can, and I'm sure as Erica can, and there have been certain storms. And at the moment, they were horrendous.
Yeah.
And perhaps even in some cases at the moment, we realize we may have lost our life. But then we get out of it and we not looking about what we might have lost physically, but we're grateful that we're still here and alive. And that's the whole situation. The one who is lashed by the storm is often the one who is grateful. Now, it does not follow that we seek to stand in the path of the destructive storm. It's not that someone's saying, well, you know, Ed, I want to grow in the Lord, so I'm going to go and position myself in some sort of tragedy. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure there are people who might think like that. But we don't go and set ourselves up in some sort of tragedy,
yes.
okay, in order to learn gratitude. But the blessed who suffer and mourn deep loss can be blessed by God in that suffering.
Yes.
See, if you enter into a tragedy and you don't have a God consciousness, you can be a Christian, but you don't have a God consciousness, then you can't be aware that God is with you and growing with you.
Yeah, yeah.
So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Daniel in the lion's den, or the three guys in the fire,
Yes.
they had a consciousness of God.
Yes.
So even when they're thrown into the fire, there was the Son of Man. Or even when he's thrown in the lion's den, there was the angels of God that shut the lions' mouths.
Yes, yes, yes.
So they weren't blessed because of those things. They were already blessed before those things.
yes.
So even someone who is blessed can experience fire. Someone who's blessed can experience hungry lions.
Yes, yes.
But the difference is that we're already blessed. We're already in that state of knowing God. So when we're in that state of God consciousness, we can handle these things because God is comforting us. But then there are those who will fall apart because there's not a God consciousness. And I think in some way there's a little bit of that with Esther, Hadassah. And that's where at first when Mordecai says to her, take a stand, she's like, I can't do that. No one knows. At that point, I think she didn't know the blessedness of God. But then she went through a time of fasting. And then when he finished that fasting, she said, go ahead, I'm going to do it. And if I perish, then I perish.
Yeah.
And that to me, Erica, is that she got to a state of God's presence, blessedness. Would you agree?
Yes.
But it came about because she had to reposition herself.
It's beautiful.
So she could see a storm coming. And when she was asked, he's like, no, there's enough. But then Mordecai says, well, if you don't, help will come from somewhere else and you won't survive. I mean, that was pretty strong words. So she went away and fasted.
Yes.
And see, that's what happened. If you don't feel that you're in that place, you have to reposition yourself.
Yeah.
And you've got to get in that place to do it because you have to be able to handle it. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it's written by Solomon, chapter 7, verses 2 to 4. It's always an unusual text. It says, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. Sorrow is better than laughter, for when a face is sad, a heart may be merry, or happy. And verse 4 says, the mind of the wise is in the house of mourning. while the mind of fools is in the house of pleasure. You know, I got to be honest with you, Ed. For years, I've pondered these words, wondering, you know, what really is this all about? Because it seems oxymoron, it seems confusing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You think about it. It says here, it's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting.
Yeah. What?
What? Go to a house of a funeral rather than the house of the wedding?
Yeah. What?
Sorrow is better than laughter. Crying is better than laughter. For when a face is sad, a heart may well be happy. So, you know, to be honest, I still ponder on these scriptures. But, you know, then I think, I've been to quite a few funerals in my life.
Yes.
And I've been to those certain ones, Ed, where at certain times I've heard people get the microphone who knew the departed one, and they tell stories on how that one who's departed had encouraged them, influenced them, or helped them.
Yes.
And even though there's sadness in the room, as they spoke and as they helped us to remember their life, this person, the atmosphere changes. And it's not that there isn't mourning, but there seems to be something majestic. There seems to be this blessedness, this joy, or this peace. There's tears,
Yes.
but at the same time, there's laughters when you reflect. You heard the bells of faith ringing in the minds and hearts of those who've come in to honor this person. And in a strange and indescribable way, a heart may be happy in the house of mourning. That's what the Beatitude says. So even in that place of mourning, there's this happiness. Like even when I was at Pastor Shane's mum's funeral,
Yes.
you know, some weeks ago. And for me particular, it had to do with the pictures. And there's a number of slides they put up there. And
Yes.
I mean, I must admit the last ones of her life when she's older didn't make me feel over happy. I felt a sadness for her. But when I think of all the things she did, and they talked about how she played the piano, and she did all these things, there was this joy and this laughter to where even in the midst of the mourning, there is this incredible, majestic peace or joy or blessing. And that's what it's talking about.
Yes.
Because when you have hope in God, it enables you to handle the situation you're in. I'm not saying enjoy it, but handle it.
Handle it. Yeah.
See, the righteous also mourn when they see people treated unjustly. So mourning is not just about what I'm experiencing, but it's also having compassion for others. You know, it's so easy today because of our wounds and situations that we develop an armor or a hard shell
Yes. Yes.
because we want to protect ourselves from the feeling of pain of others. I mean, how many times do we go past someone on the street? Like today, you know, we see more people who are homeless or living in cars here
Yeah.
than I've ever seen. And that's simply because of the lack of availability for houses right now.
Yep.
And I wonder how much we close off our hearts. I was in Asia one time.
Yes.
And I was with a missionary, a good person. And when I'd go in these countries, I'll go and get change. You know what I mean? As much as I can.
Yep.
Then in these countries, of course, there's so much more beggars.
Yes.
And every time I walk past a beggar, I drop something in. Something in. I mean, in one day, it can be 20 stops.
Yes.
Okay, I just dropped it. I mean, it's trivial, the money to our terms. You know what
Yes.
I mean? But I just dropped it. And after 5 days, the missionary pulled me aside and said, I notice every time you walk past, a street beggar, you put something in. I said, yeah. He says, what do you do that for? And I said, well, it may not be what I'm doing for them and as much as what I'm doing for me.
Yes.
Now, I give the gift. What they do with it is between them and God.
Yes. Yes.
But when I go by, I just feel this compulsion, perhaps mourning or grief, that at least in some way I should have compassion.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what we're really working in the church, for compassion. You know what I mean? Whether it be that older lady in that tent or the other areas, is some form of compassion. Now, sometimes they'll try and take advantage of it.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean you don't have compassion. I think a lot of us as Christians have become hard-hearted. And, you know, every month we try to reach out to our community.
Yes.
And a lot of Christians have come to me and said, Pastor, I think that Sunday night after doing that is a waste of time. And Christians say, we don't like it. And I say, don't you have compassion?
Yeah.
Because it's not about our church people. It's about this. But it gives us a chance every month to reach out to persons in our community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And blessed are those who mourn is not just talking about what you go through yourself, but we've got to not lose the mourning for others.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay? So the blessed continue to mourn in the face of injustice. You know, I like to read books, you know that one.
Yes.
And if you ever want to read the life story, a lady called Anne Frank, which is quite, ever heard of Anne Frank?
Yes.
Okay. You read any of her stories?
No.
Okay. Well, they were German-born Jews.
Yes.
Okay. And then the 1933 or something, when the Hitler came into power, the two Frank children, girls, and the parents took off to Holland to escape. And regrettably, the Germans came there. And so the Germans made it the ruling that they're going to capture all of the Jews of Holland and take them to the concentration camps. And so the Franks, the mum and dad, 2 kids, with another 4 other Jewish people, hid in a secret room.
Yeah.
But they got discovered.
Yes.
And it was in 1944. It was only about less than a year before they'd be liberated.
Yeah.
And they were taken to Poland, Auschwitz, to that terrible place. And the only one in the family who survived was the father. And the daughters and the mother were only 3 months off before being liberated, before the Americans, and they died. But one witness who was with Anne Frank, and she was 15 when she died, by the way.
Yeah.
And one witness who was with Anne Frank in the camp said her tears never ran dry. Now, when it says her tears never ran dry, you got to understand her body never gave up.
Yeah.
Never, her spirit never surrendered to compassion fatigue. So when her tears never dried up, it wasn't because of her, but because she saw the other injustices.
Yeah.
And she was so moved. They said that to the end she was able to mourn, and she was a blessed presence for all who knew her. Meaning she carried the presence of God.
Yes.
It wasn't just that she carried the presence of God that touched over. And so when it says, blessed are those who mourn, simply means that it was not only mourning for her own suffering, but she was mourning for other people and their needs.
Yeah.
You know, so this beatitude calls on us as the faithful to mourn over evil, even in our own lives, where we realize that we've become hard.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself hard, then, you know, failure to love God and failure to love the people that God's created should produce a level of grief in us.
Yes.
We should be saying, God, why am I so hard-hearted? Why am I not having compassion? Why am I reacting that on a Sunday I don't see this here? Or why am I reacting I don't want to sow seed? Why does it happen? See, blessed are those who experience this mourning. We feel what happens. So what happens to people who mourn because of their own pain and at the same time are insensitive to the pain of others? So what happens to somebody who's going through a hard time and they're grieving for the hard time, yet they don't have compassion towards others who are grieving? You know, I often say that, you know, when you can give out of your own need, you've truly given.
Yes.
I talked to one waitress one time in America. You know, they live on tips. It used to
Yeah.
be 10%, then it was 15%, then it was 20%. I don't know what it is now, probably 25%. It's going to cost more for a tip than the meal, okay? But I remember saying to this one young lady,
Yes.
and I said to her, and she's only getting like $5 an hour
Oh, wow.
because they live on tips, not like
Yeah.
here. And I said to her, who are the best tippers? She says, normally it's the poor people.
Yeah.
And I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, how's that work? She said, because they understand what it is to have need.
Yes. Yes.
And in your own need, when you learn to give, there is a blessing,
Yeah.
not hoarding it. So there's no hint that you are blessed because you're mourning for your own area but being hard towards others. If you are mourning because your own hardship, but you're hard towards others, then you are not in the blessed state.
Yes. Yes.
See, those who are aware of their failures, okay, who come to God and saying, God, help me to be more compassionate, they will experience the blessing and comfort of God. And from the depths of their souls will come the quiet peace of God in the midst of their mourning. It says we can do this.
Yes.
And these people are a blessed people because they have God's presence. And so when we read this particular Beatitude, the second one in Matthew 5:4, and it said, blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. It's really talking paramount and clearly, okay, that it's those who are already in that blessed state.
Yes.
Not meaning that, hey, because I'm mourning, I will enter into this blessed state. But rather than this word blessed here is meaning you're already in that place. And while you're mourning, you'll be comforted. How? Because you're already in that place. And that's why we've got a hunger for the presence of God.
Yes, yes.
So when you have the presence of God and you go through a time of mourning, you will be comforted.
Yes.
But if you go through the mourning and you know God, but you don't have God's presence, you will not be comforted. I always say, and I'm sure you heard me say it as I finish, is that just because I'm a Christian, it doesn't mean I won't go through trials.
Yeah, yeah.
Just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I won't see death. It doesn't mean I won't see disease or sickness or financial hardships. The Bible doesn't say because I'm a Christian I won't see this. But what the Bible says is that God will be with me. And when it says God is with me, that's blessed.
Yes.
It's not meaning that because I'm in this hard time, I'm going to find comfort. I'm already in comfort, therefore I'll hand it. So when I see like Margaret and Colin,
Yes.
it's not them coming to church of tears and saying, hey, we're grieving, I need to find God's Spirit. They say, we already have God's Spirit.
Yeah, yeah.
And He's comforting us during this time. The sad thing is, Ed and Erica, is that there are a lot of people who don't know how to walk in the Spirit of God.
Yes, yes.
And we've got a hunger for it.
Yes.
And if you don't have it, then do at least what Esther did. Spend several days to set yourself apart, pray and fast.
Yes.
She went from this, I can't do it, and Mordecai said, well, God will bring deliverance from somewhere else, but don't think you'll be spared. She fasted and prayed. She come back and says, for such a time as this, if I perish, I perish. Therefore, her life did mean anything, because now it wasn't about self-preservation. It was about grieving or mourning for her people.
Yes.
That was the shift. And I think the story of Esther is a wonderful, wonderful story of that dynamic shift. And that's encouragement to us that no matter how our heart is, there can be a shift.
Yes, yes.
Amen? And we really need that shift.